Alright, so in today's video, we are going to be discussing how much pressure is on Daniel Jones this upcoming season. Now, before we get into the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's jump right into the video. So there's been a lot of talk around Daniel Jones the last few days, mainly because of what he was talking about when it came to his fifth-year option. Now, obviously, the Giants did not pick up his fifth-year option, meaning that his future with the Giants is very uncertain because as of right now, meaning with the Giants not picking up his fifth-year option, it really means that they're not sure that he is the future of their franchise with Brian Daboll and Joe Shea not picking up his fifth-year option. So obviously, there is a lot of discussion around Daniel Jones. But if we're looking at Daniel Jones and the way that he's handled this situation, you have to say that Daniel Jones has handled this situation of not getting his fifth-year option picked up. He's handling it like a pro, and he's handling it very, very well. Daniel Jones basically said it is what it is, and there's nothing more than he can do about it. So Daniel Jones, in my opinion, has the right mentality about this whole situation. He's not letting it get to him. Now, nobody in their right mind is just going to sit there and be like, oh, I'm okay with this. No, if somebody's about to lose their job, or there's a chance that somebody's going to lose their job in the future, you're not going to just sit there and mentally be like, okay, everything's fine. Daniel Jones, obviously on the inside, has heard about this because nobody in their right mind wants to lose their job. If somebody wants to lose their job, they just don't want to be there. But from what I can tell about Daniel Jones, he wants to be there, and I really do think that he has the right mentality for wanting to still be there. He's doing the best that he can. He's controlling what he can control, and that's really all you can do in this situation. Obviously, the team may not see a future with him, but the best thing for Daniel Jones is to sit there and do what he can. Don't let other outside factors get in the way. He can't sit there and worry 24/7. It sucks, but he also has to just sit there, put in the work, and things will figure itself out if it's meant to work out and if he does play well. So with the pressure side of things, Daniel Jones obviously handling this very well, but there is a ton of pressure on Daniel Jones this year to perform, because while him as a person doesn't seem to be an issue, and he seems to be a very likable guy, and nobody seems to have an issue about him personally, it's the on-field play that's really the biggest concern when it comes to Daniel Jones. And the first thing that stands out with Daniel Jones is his turnover issues. In his 3 years as a starter, he has 29 interceptions and 36 fumbles. So that's a major problem. You're not giving your team opportunities to be successful, and you're giving the other team way too many opportunities to take advantage of the mistakes that you made. So obviously that's a big issue with Daniel Jones. And this past season, he was not healthy for most of it. He missed 6 games due to injury. So again, the Giants organizations, they see those things as issues. Obviously, the injury is not, I don't want to call that an issue. That's more of a concern. But the on-field play, when it comes to the turnovers, that's a huge issue. So pressure-wise, Daniel Jones's play has left a lot up in the air and a lot to be desired. I think Daniel Jones has potential. I really do think Daniel Jones has the talent to be good. I don't think it's all Daniel Jones's fault either, because while Daniel Jones hasn't performed on the football field like many people thought he should for being a first-round pick, you can't blame it all on him. I don't think it's all Daniel Jones's fault, because first you have to look at what he's been given around him. And if we're looking first on the offensive line has been garbage ever since Daniel Jones got into New York. So that's not a good thing for a quarterback. The Giants are not setting him up to be successful right off the bat, because if you have a bad offensive line, Joe Burrow's an outlier in that because he was doing remarkable things last year. But when you have a bad offensive line, it's nearly impossible to do anything and be successful in any offense that you're running. Now, there's obviously special talents like Joe Burrow who can make things work with a garbage offensive line. But Daniel Jones, he was sacked 105 times in 3 years, and that's with missing 11 games in that 3-year time period. So if he was healthy and playing all those games, he may have been sacked probably 120, 130 times. Like, it's bad how garbage the offensive line was for the New York Giants, and they still can't seem to get it right. Now, they just drafted Evan Neal, so that's a correct step. That's the right direction. But the previous regime, which we'll get into, never really set Daniel Jones up to succeed, which then leads to the next part of the offense, the wide receiving core. The wide receiving core has been a disappointment, I think is the kindest word you can give for the Giants and their skill position. But then we're looking at the guys that the Giants have invested a whole bunch of time and a whole bunch of money in. They haven't been good either. You look at Kadarius Toney, their 2021 first-round pick. He struggled last year, and he only played in 10 games. But in those 10 games, he only was able to get 39 receptions, 420 yards, and 0 touchdowns. So right out of the gate. That's terrible for a first round pick, not producing, especially for how much you put into somebody drafting him in the first round. When you draft somebody in the first round, the expectations are higher, and the disappointment that they got out of Kadarius Toney was not good whatsoever, and the production was so low. And then their other receiver, their other guy that they thought would be more contributing, a bigger contributor to the offense, is Kenny Golladay. He was given a 4-year, $72 million contract. So the expectations were through the roof with Kenny Golladay, and he laid an egg, to say the least. He did not perform very well whatsoever. He only had 37 receptions, 521 yards, and again, no touchdowns. Now, you can chalk that up to maybe the quarterback play, but also the receivers, they were disappointing. And while I think the players on field can perform better than what they do, Daniel Jones, the receiving core, they didn't play very well last year. They were a bad football team last year. But you could also say that none of this is any of the players' fault, and you look directly at the front office and you look at the guys in charge, and you mainly look at Joe Judge. You can chalk up every failure of the Giants during his tenure to anything that Joe Judge did. Daniel Jones, none of this is his fault. And I know we're talking about the pressure on Daniel Jones, but the disaster that was Joe Judge as head coach was evident just this past season, because after his final game, he goes on an extremely long rant saying that this isn't a clown team, which nobody says that. If you say that, you're admitting you're a clown team. Nobody goes on an 11-minute rant saying that people want to be there and that you're not a clown show when you're a clown show. Like, that's pretty evident. Like, no wonder people get this assumption that Bill Belichick sends guys off to kill franchises and then he just brings them right back. Like, his tenure in New York was terrible, and everything about it was bad. There was really nothing good about it. But then you can also look at the play calling, and you can literally chalk it up to one play, the 3rd and 9 quarterback sneak. After that, the fact that he wasn't fired on the spot is just insane to me, because if a head coach does that, they honestly deserve to be fired on the spot. That is just dumb. Your players, Daniel Jones could be the worst quarterback in the NFL. Kadarius Toney, Kenny Golladay, Saquon Barkley, the offensive line, the defense can suck. Everything can be bad about your team. When you're doing that as a head coach, I don't care how bad the players are. The head coach doesn't deserve to be there. Like, that was bad. And the fact that the Giants were even considering keeping him after that is just insane to me. Like, it took Dave Gettleman retiring, and then that's what really got Joe Judge fired. It wasn't Joe Judge and his incompetence as a coach that got him fired. It was the fact that Dave Gettleman decided to retire, and then the next day Joe Judge was fired. So it's kind of insane that it really felt like Joe Judge could have been back for another year. And Joe Judge is so bad that you could probably mistake him for a junior high football coach. Like, that's how bad he was. Like, he was not good. So this leads all the way back to the question, how much pressure is on Daniel Jones? I just ran through everything that has happened with him, basically the spark notes, because you could go on forever about this. And the pressure, unfortunately, is very high for Daniel Jones. Obviously, his situation wasn't good. Obviously, what he's been surrounded with his entire career has not been good. And not all of it's his fault. But as you can tell, with Brian Daboll coming in and Joe Schoen coming in, they obviously have different expectations, and they want Daniel Jones to perform. And they obviously don't think Daniel Jones can perform to the level that they want him to. And it was evident by them not picking up the 5th-year option. So that's kind of the big thing with Daniel Jones and the New York Giants. They didn't want his 5th-year option, so that kind of shows that, hey, this may be it. This may be your last year. So for Daniel Jones's career, the expectations are very high. Like, he may have some of the most pressure on him of any quarterback in the NFL. But there is good things about this. There is a bright side to this for Daniel Jones and for New York Giants fans. One, like I mentioned earlier, I think Daniel Jones has the talent. I really do. I just don't think it's ever been utilized correctly. And when you bring in a guy like Brian Daboll, who helped Josh Allen in his career, Josh Allen was a talented quarterback, and those two guys are in 2 different leagues of talent. But when you have a guy like Brian Daboll, who in a way helped Josh Allen become what he is, obviously it's not all Brian Daboll, but we know what Brian Daboll can do with his quarterbacks. He can make them better. That is a bright side. Brian Daboll can come in and make a quarterback better. And that's what the Giants are kind of hoping that he can do with Daniel Jones. So that is a bright thing for Daniel Jones. And it's also, again, an important piece is his mentality. Daniel Jones has a really good mentality. So with all that being said, if you have a good mentality going into it, even if it does fail, at least you're showing other teams that you're willing to put in the work and that you're willing to have a good attitude about it, even if things aren't going your way. I've never thought Daniel Jones was a bad guy, and I really think that's going to help him in the long run, because after this year, he may not be a starter in the NFL ever again. And we'll know that probably by mid-season. Like, that's how quickly we'll know how much Brian Daboll can be successful with Daniel Jones. But I just think that his mentality is so good enough, his work ethic is good enough, and his ability to not be a distraction to his team. He kind of just puts his head down and works. He's a really quiet guy. We really don't hear anything bad about him, which is a really good thing for Daniel Jones. The fact we don't hear a thing about that, if his career as a starter does end, at least we know that teams will probably be willing to bring him in as a backup quarterback. I think Daniel Jones would be a solid backup quarterback. He's a guy that has talent, but obviously we've seen that through a full season, he hasn't really produced like a starting quarterback. But a guy with Daniel Jones's talent, he can probably bring a quick boost, a quick spark to the offense if a starter does go down for a couple weeks. I think Daniel Jones does have the talent with that. And am I being optimistic about a guy that I don't watch on a weekly basis? Probably. But at the same time, I think the talent's there, and I just think the personality and the person of Daniel Jones is there for him to at least be around in the NFL. The pressure is high, the situation sucks, but there are good things about this, and I really do think that pairing him with Brian Daboll was the best thing for Daniel Jones and his career. But those are my thoughts on Daniel Jones and how much pressure I think is on him. Give me your thoughts down below. How much pressure do you think is on Daniel Jones, and how much of it do you think is his fault? How much do you think of his career ups and downs are his fault? How much do you blame it on Dave Gettleman, Joe Judge, or Daniel Jones himself? How much blame does Daniel Jones deserve for the failures or successes of his career? Give me your thoughts down below, and I'll see you in the next one.